go ahead and get into the presentation now. Thank you so much, Chandler, and talk about how we can get a good program going. So let's go to the next slide, please. So typically management commitment for teleworking is tied to a lot of return on investment types of issues. So anything from ranging, from increasing productivity, usually in the range of 10 to 20%, if the job is right, the employee is right, the technology works, manager approves, to recruitment and retention being the main reasons. I would say up to 2 months ago, a lot of employers, are starting to implement more teleworking in conjunction with hoteling or desk sharing to reduce overhead costs. Obviously, sustainability, improving coverage for some cities. I know that, it allows city employees to be available way past what are, typical business hours. And obviously there's no, you're not in traffic, so you're not going to be late, and to prepare for business continuity, which is where we are today. Let's go to the next one, please. A manager's role, I think, in this environment is to create a work environment that really does maximize the productivity of staff, given whatever technology there is and remote access. And with COVID especially, we had to base it on whatever level of trust there was in the workplace between a manager and an employee, and the established relations and communication strategies, and always with the manager approving of it. Let's go to the next one, please. However, I do want to point out that during COVID, what we have gone through is extreme teleworking. This is not the way we had planned it. Typically, a telework day would be a day that an employee's at home, they're still communicating, collaborating, but nobody else is home. They're not homeschooling, they're not providing childcare, they're not busy cooking dinner or lunch for everybody and being stressed. It had to be before all about work. But now, unfortunately, we have all these issues under one roof. So I want to point out some data that, talks about who was teleworking before and, what it looks like under COVID. This survey has a very good response rate. It was based on 6 swing states with 6,000 participants. And what this data is showing us is that of the people who were teleworking during COVID, only about 40%, of the general worker population could telework. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, because there is the other 60% who do not have the types of jobs that lend themselves to teleworking. And we cannot forget about those people. But of the people, the overall 40% who were, there were people who had done remote work before, some before, but a good 20% jumped into this cold. Let's go to the next slide. So there's no training, nothing. And to go back to the extremeness of this situation, this is a SHRM survey that was conducted. They asked, who are you co-working with? And as you can see, this again illustrates the point that I was making. Obviously the pets, well, the pets we can keep quiet if, we're working, but you've got, people with significant others under the same, roof, maybe even sharing broadband. You've got children, and only 14% said they were all by themselves. By the way, that group, that 14% group, are the group that often may, suffer from burnout or depression or isolation, because it does get difficult. But this makes it very, a very complicated situation. Let's move on. And the SHRM question also asked about interruptions by others in the household under normal teleworking. That really should be minimal. But as we can see, a big group said, at least 0 to 5 times. And there were people who said 5 to 10 and more than 10. So I think these are important considerations. And as you can see, we have made huge changes in participating in video conferencing. And this is something that we never thought we would be there this fast. In fact, most of the projections I had seen were showing collaborative technologies taking off to this level in the next 3 years. Let's go to the next slide. Now, where these people are working is also important to know, as I'm going to get into the discussion. As you can see now, this shows a healthy amount of people at least having a separate space when they work at home. However, look, there's quite a few people who are still working at the dining table, and if they have others at home, that must make it very difficult. I don't like it when I see people working on the couch or in bed. Those are not ergonomic settings, and they're really not conducive to, serious teleworking. So let's keep moving. And there was also a question asked with the CNBC survey about what people were doing with the time they saved as a result of not commuting. I have to tell you, in a non-COVID situation, usually what we see is that people say they're working more than any of the other choices here. But as you can see, the change here was they were spending time with their families. Some were relaxing, some slept in more and did hobbies. And then some were working more, which I hear about a lot now. As I do focus groups with teleworkers, there is a little bit of burnout going on. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And there's difficulty focusing. Let me tell you, the #1 top distraction, and I'm surprised employers have not jumped on this, is people watching news about the pandemic, watching TV, listening to the radio, because even under COVID, the arrangement should be that when you're working, do not, bring these distractions into your work environment. But of course, then there's all those other worries about the virus and the kids at home. Let's keep moving. And, I'm sorry if I have some, data, but I think it's going to help bring home the points that I'm going to be making. If we are going to make this behavior stick, what are some ideas that can help us? First of all, I really do want to talk to the fact that I think organizations have to mature to the point where they do have some policies, guidelines, parameters around teleworking, because that allows organizations, first of all, to protect both their rights and the employees' rights under this setup. It allows employers to have tools that talk about eligibility, about how to select, what are the appropriate jobs, what are the technology issues, so that teleworking is not only available for 1 or 2 people and it's based on a manager making a very subjective decision, but that it kind of makes it a very objective process. There are legal pitfalls that you got to watch out for. I'll go over those. And those are usually covered in the policies. None of them have been showstoppers, and it's also important to be transparent. And obviously, we want some of this teleworking to persist. So let's move on to the next slide. I do want to, there's just one piece of data on this I'm going to point out, that as far as productivity, about 60%, it's the third bullet down, 60% do say that they're either as productive or even more productive when they are working at home as opposed to the office under COVID. So this is probably really good news that for the most part we are keeping the productivity. So let's move on to the next slide. Are we going back to the office? Now, this data was collected mid-April. I bet you right now some of this is changing, but look at the, what worries me is that of the whole universe of people who are teleworking, 55% are saying we want to return back to the office. I bet you part of that is because they look at returning to the office as going back to a normal situation, which may not be so, but that is something that is troubling. And a good 24% are still saying they want to work from home, and 20% haven't made up their minds. Let's go back. Let's go to the next one, please. I'm going to finish some of this data very quickly. This further brings up, some issues that I think are important to be addressed, probably in policies. One of them is distractions, that when people are teleworking, it really should be part and parcel of the policy that, some of this stuff is not okay. Obviously, some other issues under COVID have been lack of interaction and the childcare part. Again, working with young children in the house is very difficult. In fact, you have 2 jobs and not one. So I think those are important things to point out. Let's move on. So what are some items that do need to be addressed in these policies from a legal perspective? First of all, I'm not an attorney and I won't pretend to be one. So please, when you are crafting your policies, make sure your in-house counsel takes a look at it. But first and foremost, wage and labor laws, as far as your non-exempt employees, the rule for overtime is the same as in the office. You don't want them to go beyond the 40 hours because that is overtime without prior approval. And you also have to have adequate record-keeping measures to be, for employees to be documenting their hours of work for the non-exempt. Workers' comp has not been a showstopper at all in 40 years of teleworking. It even goes beyond my involvement in this field. And let me explain that. When an employee works at home, the home is an extension of the office. So what employers do need to do is to have their employees have a designated workspace. They need to share ergonomics with them and how they can be safe in that environment so that work-related accidents don't happen. If somebody goes to the kitchen, cuts their hand, that's not workers' comp, right? It's not part of their job description. But if there were something that happens in the designated workspace, it could be work-related. Has this been litigious? The good news is no. This has not been an area that has been litigious. And I always tell employers, call your workers' comp carrier, ask them if anything changes with their rates, since people are teleworking, and the answer is no unless you start coming up with a lot of those types of injuries. As far as OSHA is concerned, employers do not have to do home office inspections, however, do keep in mind again that you as an employer are liable. So the more you prepare employees with safety and all of that, I think the more important it is. With full-time teleworkers, some employers, like even the County of LA, that I had a very long working relationship with, were doing some home office inspections in the DPSS units. But this is not something that is done. As far as your ADA and FMLA, telework is not supposed to be an accommodation unless it is something that your HR department weighs in on, and you can make a sound decision as to whether or not it could be part of it. We have to also be careful about discrimination and retaliation types of issues. Be very careful in your policies. Do not use the words, teleworking is a perk or teleworking is a privilege or is a benefit. Telework is a workplace strategy. Keep it neutral. We don't want to create haves and have-nots. Have these issues been showstoppers? Again, I want to iterate that no, they haven't been. Let's move on to the next one, please. So what's included in policy language? Often goals. Why is your organization doing it? Of course, to provide business continuity now, but also do go back to some of that, return on investment types of issues that I pointed out at the beginning. Maybe it's, save on overhead. Maybe it's to improve morale, work-life balance. Obviously, selection criteria should be there. Eligibility criteria. employees have to hit productivity or above to be considered. Their jobs have to be on the list maybe to be considered, or the manager makes a determination. And what are some other elements that go into this selection? What is the process? Is there an application process? Is it just based on a description? How often can it be allowed? Is accessibility important? Of course it is, and availability too. And obviously some of the legalities definitely do make distinctions between what is allowed in terms of equipment. Some IT managers do not like bring your own device to the table types of solutions, and they say you have to have our equipment, but we will provide the VPN or remote access or whatever the cloud-based solution that is available. As far as insurance, this is really regarding the equipment, who provides it. If the employer brings it, employer provides it. And if the employee brings it, obviously it's the employee. So discussion of workspace and making sure there's no issues on the non-teleworkers. Let's move on to the next page. And this is a form that we typically call an agreement. And it allows you to tailor the individual situation based on every single employee. Because some employees may be able to telework more, but I think it's important to have dates in that. By the way, I always recommend to employers to tie this process to their annual evaluation, so it's reviewed at least once a year and updated. Agree on what are the teleworking hours. Even I think it's important to have some agreement on what are some core hours or flex hours, if flexing is available. And as you can see, there is more detail. But this is a document that is important, that it's reviewed between an employee and his or her supervisor, their supervisor. Let's move on. Very important to, obviously, this whole process is moving away from managing by presence to managing by productivity. So your managers have to be very well versed in identifying goals, direction, objectives, deliverables. They need to, if you do not have a managing by objectives type of training, you really want to introduce that. And obviously the oversight is important, and the coaching. And sometimes it's great to even get employees to do this and participate in it by coming up with their own objectives and deliverables. And the manager should be giving feedback on an ongoing process basis. Let's go to the next slide. And to kind of just share with you something about productivity. This slide is a little older than I like, but I do want to point out that when it comes to measuring productivity, this survey was conducted by SHRM of some managers and how they managed employees while they were teleworking. As you can see, the most popular at the top are communications, how quickly people are responding, emails, phone calls, listing of the goals and parameters. But I do want to draw your attention also to kind of the bottom of the list, which is the organization monitors employees via software that tracks and records computer behavior. And I've seen some documents come out nowadays about, webcams and all that to ensure employees are working, or, also watching out for computer strokes. This is not what you want your managers to be doing. Managers should be managing. They shouldn't be, looking at this as a backup for whether or not deliverables are being done. Let's move on, please. Now, we talked a little bit about managing, with goal setting. I think that, COVID did put a lot of pressure on managers to get here fast. I think that even in an ongoing situation, you really want to assist teleworkers if, they're going to be teleworking a few days a week, maybe, or, if they're going to be at home even right now, talk about what's going to happen during that week, define, as I mentioned, deliverables, objectives, quality, quantity, timeliness, have the employee put together something saying, here's what I've agreed to do, review the status, coach the employees. And, you know, if you can do, by the way, that review through a video on a weekly basis while people are still, you know, maybe teleworking 100%, that's really valuable. What organizations tell me is that we don't wait for the yearly evaluation to go through this process anymore. And this is an ongoing process every week. And I'm sure that your strong managers are doing this. Let's move on. So this is a very simple task schedule. You don't have to use it. Some managers and employees have such a great understanding of the work. But again, maybe for the emergency or just to create accountability initially, you know, you can have an employee fill out something like this and on a weekly basis, you know, hand it back to the manager, just if the manager needs this to, you know, to be aware of what the employee is doing. Sometimes managers are very busy also with doing their own projects as well as managing. So let's move on. You know, the style of management that we have with every employee is different. And those of you from the HR side of the house probably are very familiar with some of the terms I'm using. There are employees that need a lot of direction, meaning you just have to be very prescriptive. These may be employees who don't have the skill level, who are new, or with some jobs, you just have to, you know, be very direct. The next layer of management is that of coaching, where there's still some, you know, level of providing direction, but you're coaching the employee, you know, so that they get a better understanding, and you can get them maybe to an advising level where the employee pretty much, you know, knows what the goals and deliverables are, and the job of the manager becomes one where you're just, you know, providing feedback. Delegation is fantastic. When you have an employee that you can delegate to, you say 2 words, a sentence, and they know exactly what it takes. You know, that is probably a very good place for a teleworker to be. However, if, you know, you have these various styles of management with different employees, that does not go away with teleworking. Believe me, there are people who work in call centers. They need a lot of direction. Their goals are, you know, very easy to manage, but, you know, you still have to keep it at that level of direction. So your style of management doesn't change based on the employee, but you want to develop more trust. Trust is a huge pillar of this. If you can't trust an employee in the office, you're not going to trust them at home. Obviously, we're managing a lot more collaboratively, emails. I mean, my God, everything you know, from Slack to chat to text to, you know, Teams, there's all out there. And we do want to get to a place where we're encouraging more and more independence as employees mature. Let's move on, please. So with communications, I think we do want to think through how does teleworking impact that? And, you know, obviously there's impromptu communications that still can happen by phone or electronically. Believe me, you know, there are, and I'll talk about some of those virtual collaboration tools that are out there right now. But, you know, people are going as far as even doing the virtual water cooler discussion. And, you know, one thing that should be clear is that when employees are teleworking, it is critical for everybody to understand it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to call, it's okay to email, it's okay to text. If the employee, you know, may take a little bit longer to answer, maybe they're on a phone call, but I think a lot of these expectations should be set up at the front, and I think the employee and the manager should have a discussion whether flexing is possible beginning or end of the day, and to what degree employees can be possible during core hours. Of course, some of this changed with COVID, but this is how teleworking should be done. Let's keep moving on. So I think that, you know, obviously I talked to this, but availability, accessibility are key. And I do want to just say that it's very critical that employees keep their Outlook calendars or whatever platform you use for scheduling up to date and current. so work and meeting times are clearly expressed. Now, under COVID, a lot of employers, or I'm sorry, employees have had to delineate personal non-available time, especially if they're providing childcare or, dependent care, homeschooling, all of that, where they're sharing these responsibilities in a household. So I think those discussions became very important as we're going through, COVID. However, moving on, there really shouldn't be, hopefully, as we get to some state of what may be normal, there shouldn't be this personal non-available time. But if it's part and parcel of what we move forward with, well, so it be. There might be some childcare issues moving forward. People may not feel comfortable sending children to childcare. Let me tell you, some states like Georgia even opened up childcare centers 3 weeks ago. So states are doing very, very different things. But as of yesterday, based on some of the counties' discussions and the city of LA's, I noticed that we are opening very quickly. Let's move on, please. Integrating employees and brainstorming, critical. You start brainstorming with someone, pause and think who else should be involved, make it electronic, make sure that you're getting the right kind of people. FaceTime during this pandemic has been very helpful for employees to see each other, to cut back on the isolation. I think for managers also to communicate with employees, see how they're reacting, see how they look, I don't mean physically, but I mean, do they look happy? Do they look engaged? We do want to watch out for some of that. Let's move on to the next slide. We have to have clear direction on teamwork. When is all hands on deck required? Let me tell you, even in environments where employees are going back in a staggered mode to offices, all the meetings are still happening by Zoom to make sure that actually you don't have too many people in a conference room, but also that you're integrating people who are there through video conference, Zoom, WebEx, whatever you're using. Again, doing meetings, with electronic collaboration really means that every meeting should have an agenda, should be clear what you want to accomplish. So clarity is, top of the list. A lot of teams find that they do still do that 15-minute huddle. Hi, hello, how are you doing? And it might just be that they're checking in on each other, but it does help preserve your culture. Even if it's a non-COVID type of environment, but if we're doing a lot of teleworking, that does help. I think I've talked about the depression and that can come again. The more we can be about collaboration, and I'll talk to that a few slides down, which is non-work related, helps with some of that. Make sure your employees are trained. I just talked to an employer who introduced soft phones right before COVID, but people went home not knowing how to use it. And so a lot of training had to happen on how they use a soft phone off of their computer. So make sure that your employees are trained, make sure your employees have a certain degree of computer literacy on collaborative technology, while they're teleworking. And this is important whether it's part-time, full-time, or even from project to project basis. Let's move on. I hope my pace is not too fast, but I think I've talked about some of what's here, but building trust through interactions is critical. The more trust we have with our employees and with our coworkers, the easier it gets to telework. Let's move on. I will address some of these issues about virtual breaks on a different slide. But making sure employees have work-life balance is important too. Let's move on, please. So what are some ideas for, boosting morale and collaboration? And I've really, some of this is based on, a source that I went to, but let me tell you, I'm hearing about these all the time. People are still doing birthday celebrations. They're doing their weekly calls where everybody gets together. They do icebreakers. There are, smaller group chats. There is that water cooler aspect. There is, here's meet my pet. Here's meet my children. That is keeping people sane in this environment where, they've been pretty much closed up. And, I think it's important for employers to be thankful for, for everything that the employees are doing. Let's move on. Planning for success. Just a few thoughts on that. And I have one more slide after that, so we should have time for Q&A. Please, in the telework environment, you should act on problems as they arise. They won't go away. As managers, you hear a child crying in the background. Okay, under COVID, we may have to understand that. But after COVID, there is no excuse for that. Everything should be done very professionally. And definitely no TV or radio blaring in the background, no music. There is an adjustment. I have to believe that going through what we've gone through, that employees have become much better and managers have become much better at teleworking. So let's move on to maybe what is the future of all this. Please remember my message. Behavior under disasters, catastrophes, pandemics do not stick around unless you take conscious steps in improving your management tools and in also making sure that telework is part of your culture through policies, processes, communication, and training. Manage expectations. If it's going to go away, make sure employees know that, because you don't want to have an unbalance, some morale issues. That technology for remote access for a lot of people has become very robust now. So we've tested that, but as these are issues, you do want to resolve bandwidth issues. And one area that I'm seeing very fast changes in is that up to now, employers were pretty much only pitching in for equipment if they were replacing desktops with laptops or if they had full-time employees. All of a sudden, I am seeing a trend of stipends for equipment, stipends for for whether it's Verizon or Spectrum or whoever's providing that. It could be a one-time stipend, but employers are starting to kick in a little bit of dollars towards this, especially if they're going to save on overhead. I'm working with a company right now in the state of Washington. It's a public organization. They're going from 3 floors to 2 and creating hoteling environment. And that's going to be their way going forward. So the good news, not everyone's going to want to telework, so don't worry. Some people do want to come back because work from home is not for them. But what we've improved upon is that self-selection and considering staggering a group A that works in the office 1 week, group B that works at home then alternating that are becoming critical. Some employers are doing it by days, so they have different groups and on different days, but let's try to keep some of this great change in social behavior that's happened because we know what a big problem our congestion is. I'm going to pause now, Jackie, and hopefully we have time for a few questions.
Well, we have nothing in the chat. Is there anyone that has any questions that they'd like to have Elham answer? Instead of taking time to chat, if you could unmute yourself and ask. Anybody? I'm not hearing anything.
I'll tell you the challenges that I've seen or some of the questions I get. And maybe I can do that through this a little bit just to keep you engaged is, my manager is constantly interrupting my workflow. How do I tell my manager that, they're over monitoring me? And, really the answer to that is, you have to be upfront. Managers, employees should be talking with each other. Transparency is part of this. Really, if this is happening too much, you do want your employees to talk to you. As managers, try to avoid it, first of all. And, and do those check-ins on a weekly basis. So please do step away from it. But even from employee perspectives, it's okay if employees, come to you with those kinds of issues. Has productivity dropped? I think a lot of the data is pointing to both managers and employees coming in positive about this. At a minimum, under normal teleworking, I think we should strive for at least the same level of productivity. And if it, improves, I think that's, the kind of the sugar on top, right? Or whatever the expression is. Let's see, any questions?
Hi, Elham. This is Aaron from the COG. I'm just curious on your thoughts about going back to work and how an employer or and employees should sort of work through going back to the office and also working at home. As I think Jackie and yourself have mentioned, there's sort of hybrid models now of staggering work in the office and also working at home. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, luckily we live in California, so safety and health are two big, very issues for us. Obviously, social distancing is going to be critical moving forward. People have to rethink the design in the office. Do they have, these open environments that we created are not going to survive right now. Those are not, going to be good solutions. So, the more we can have that, those cubicles, and again, all this has to be managed, obviously by the employer and through teleworking while we're doing some of these design changes to the office. I think that, conference, having those big meetings in conference rooms, that's not going to be possible right now. I really think that we just have to have a balance and a well thought out process. And different employers are adopting different models. There's even one model that I read about, and that is a version called a 10-4, which is very interesting. Not a 4-10 like a compressed work week, but a 10-4, which means that you actually come into the office for 4 days and then spend 10 days at home working to see if the group you're working in, if anyone's gotten sick. And that gives a little bit more safety to bringing some groups back, knowing that, people are not getting sick. I hope those responses are helpful, Aaron. Go ahead, Jack, if you want to.
We do have a question. No, we have a question here. What are the recommendations on how to use the telework task forms? Should it be a daily log that's submitted to the supervisor?
It really depends on your organization. I have worked with organizations that have required it daily, and I just think that's a lot. I think weekly would be a really good kind of a log to have. But, we also have to think about, why aren't we doing the same thing with employees in the office? So I hate to create more burden for teleworkers to prove that they're working, but sometimes for turning managers around, we unfortunately have to do that. The onus is on both sides to make this work. So if the manager feels more comfortable, I would recommend maybe weekly. Daily's a lot, but believe me, I've worked with programs where it's been daily. So the whole thing about teleworking is that there's not one recipe. It has to be tailored to your organization, your culture, how you operate, where your managers are, how progressive they are, what age groups, demographics, all of that come into play. And please don't forget the 60%, of people who can't telework. Just remember, if somebody's transit dependent and they're not going to feel safe getting on a bus, if they have access to a car, that's another trip going back. And all the capacity we create through teleworking will be filled up very quickly based on, fear, safety, health issues.
Bill, I saw, that was Bill Johnson's question, and I saw him unmute for a second. Do you have any further, did you want a clarification, Bill?
Well, no, I was just kind of building off of that, thinking about, well, and you may have said it and I missed it, sorry, but what about any recommendations for the beginning of the day? Would you recommend, like a 8 a.m. check-in with staff and try to set a course for the day? Or
I definitely think that having those quick check-ins right now, when if you have 100% of teleworking going on, are probably good. I think we really should look at how we do things in the office and try to mirror them if we are under normal teleworking, which is not this COVID created work from home. But I do think those check-ins are good. And they do help build morale and get everybody on the same page. Now, the problem is 8 a.m. going to work for everyone now? I don't know, so you have to find the right time.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Jackie, we have another question here, and I'll just read it out.
Sure.
Thank you for this great presentation. If an employee uses their personal equipment, a computer, for work purposes, does that equipment become subject to search for a public records request or subpoena? Are there any protections the employee could take to prevent their personal equipment from being subject to work subpoena, besides not using their personal equipment?
Again, these are the issues with bring your own device. I am, again, not an attorney. I've heard enough attorneys talk about it, but, unfortunately, if you're putting, your jurisdiction's, information on your personal computer, that might open up some issues. But that's why some IT, directors are saying, no, we're not going to allow that. You have to use our equipment. So I would definitely get some advice from someone who's dealing in this realm, especially given that you're all in jurisdictions. But those are some of the gray areas that we're still dealing with. And the same goes with using your phones, your personal phones.
Anything else? We're getting close to the end of the hour, but I want to make sure that you get your questions asked.
Hi, this is Aaron again. I'm curious your thinking on the technology side of it. So I like you and everybody else on this conference call, we've pushed forward very, very quickly into the video conferencing world. But interestingly enough, most of the video conference I attend, everyone is without a picture, and we rarely share information. So I'm on my screen looking at the file or presentation you gave me, and we're using video conferencing. It could just as easily be done by audio conference. In terms of productivity, in terms of access and sharing, what's your thoughts on
Aaron, I think sharing the screen function is very important. So I think, yes, you can pull up the same, PowerPoint, and then everybody call in. Can it be done that way? Why should we do it that way anymore? It's so easy to share a screen. A lot of this technology is now available. The costs are not that high. I mean, even if people don't want to show themselves, that's okay. But if you're missing people, then you should have a meeting where you say, okay, let's everybody make an effort today so we can see each other. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you need that, that picture. And sometimes it becomes a distraction. However, I do want to share with you that there is Zoom fatigue, there is Teams fatigue. People are just rushing from one collaborative meeting to another, and just like meetings became an obsession in the office, which I always thought organizations meet too much. I think some of this is also at a very high level and needs to be managed much more properly.
I see Wally's got his unmuted. Wally?
Yeah, Elham, do you have any estimate of the number of, or the percentage of people who are working at home, but they prefer to work near home, but not in the home because of all the distractions and just the space issue that you mentioned?
Wally, I have not seen data on that. I think, and I've looked at a lot of, believe me, everybody and their mother started collecting information on, on work from home. but it was strictly work from home. I think everybody put co-working or shared facilities kind of aside because of the fears of COVID. But we certainly saw, how operations like WeWork and Roam and all of that were becoming popular before all of this, COVID related stuff that happened. So I definitely think there's a place in the future. And I'm working with organizations that are going to actually implement hoteling, but it's just for their own employees. So so multiple locations can work. It's just the safety type of issues if they're shared that people are fearing right now.
Last call for questions. I think this has been really interesting, and I really appreciate you're doing this, Elham. Elham has other modules that she does, and so when we ask you on your evaluation, if there's further information you're interested in, please fill it out and let us know what you thought about the information presented, and also if there's information you'd like to see further presented. I don't think, there were 2 questions in the chat and we've asked them both. Oh, Kim Fuentes is asking, what is hoteling? Do you want to?
Hoteling is when this concept of, you have a permanent desk goes away, and that really you're using your office space based on the need for use. So there is, a lot of, so basically, I'll give you examples, like in the federal government, general accounting offices had a hoteling program. The employees were only required to come into the office twice a month. That was the requirement. And when they came in, they had to reserve the space, just like you would reserve a room at the hotel. And that was working out very well for them. I don't know going forward how they're going to do it. There are also electronic ways to manage hoteling. So you can even say, I'm coming in on a certain day, this is what I need, or I need a meeting room, or, I need a screen, and you can get very fancy with it. I'm sure, Wally, if you want to chime in too, I know you're very familiar, but that's what a lot of organizations are doing.
Yeah, I think things are going to be a lot different, and I think as a community of local governments, we need to start thinking about what would work for the employees and for the managers. I know my experience with this is a lot of managers don't like people working at home, but they wouldn't mind if they were working hoteling either in their own office or in some other place, like as you said, in a WeWork or we had a Telework Facilities Exchange, maybe working in someone else's city hall. And
some people don't have, their homes are not ideal for teleworking, right? So having a facility that you check into, it makes it easier.
Yeah, and we encountered many employees who just didn't have space at home, and you pointed out appropriately early on that it's asked to be a classroom and a doctor's office and a daycare center, and spouses are there, and who really has the space at home to do this sort of thing? So I would also say I've looked at a lot of the lessons learned during the pandemic, and really, whether it's health or whether it's education or whether it's e-retail or whatever it is, the leadership in those sectors are saying, this is a good opportunity to rethink what we do and how we do it. And I think that would be something I would urge all of the management on the call and in the South Bay to start thinking about how this is a stimulus to start to rethink what government is, and e-government in particular.
And I want to also, I won't talk anymore, but you know what? I think we always follow the leader. So with an organization, so the more you can get the leader to, of your organization, whether it's a city manager or, there's a champion to talk about this flexibility, the more you're going to see the adoption.
I want to respect everybody's time. It's easy for us to go on and we can't see everybody's body language. So I want to thank Elham, and we are posting this, as I said, on our website. It was all recorded, and there will be an opportunity for you to continue to ask questions. Oh, Sam Lee says, can a survey be created for local cities? And how many cities? Actually, I've been doing a survey. The city managers have started a matrix on reopening and how many are doing telework. And I can possibly share that and the relevant parts of it. And also we can look to do possibly a survey with the evaluation sheet that we send out.
Sam, what would you want to survey? What would be the questions you're interested in?
Well,
real quick is our city, El Segundo, is putting together a plan to kind of get back to City Hall and open up. And so we're looking into, is Teleworks part of that solution? So, who would be doing that for what, what percentage of the time and things like that.
okay. Well, we'll see if we can, we don't want this to be the end actually of this dialogue. We want this to be the beginning of the dialogue. So we look forward to, I hope you'll send me further questions and we'll send out some things and ask you what further information you would like. And I'll look at the city manager's matrix and see if there's something I can put on that will explain what I'm learning from the city managers.
Also, and please, any of you who have employees or colleagues who weren't able to make it, please direct them to the website so they can actually get the same information and pose their own questions.
Okay, thank you so much. And once again, Elham, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.